The HENDRA virus is well known to horse owners, equine veterinarians and other members of the horse community around Australia. It is a disease that is both enigmatic and chilling in its effect. Everyone that has come into contact with this virus has their own story that marks their experience with one of the world's deadliest diseases.
The most important risk HENDRA virus represents is the risk to human health. There's a 60% or so mortality, so flip of a coin and you come out second best.
Look, I was shocked, and the whole of our profession was shocked when Ben Canine and Alistair Rogers both died in the normal duties of their work.
You're extremely apprehensive. I have a young family, so that's always in the back of your mind. This horse could have HENDRA.
I went to work when I was 21, and I didn't ask for it. Ben was planning a family. You can't say we put our hands up for it.
I never want to have to deal with another one of my colleagues passing away or being infected by this virus.
Since its first victims in the Brisbane suburb of the same name succumbed to HENDRA, the virus has become synonymous with a heavy burden that the equine community in Australia has had no choice but to bear.
My involvement with HENDRA goes back to '94, when I was the equine vet that treated the horses at the late Vic Rail stables in HENDRA. And as we know now, that's where the HENDRA virus was discovered.
Between '94 and 2008, most of the industry thought of HENDRA as just a very incidental thing that happened very occasionally.
2011, we had 18 independent events. Most before that, every year, on average, we only have 2. So something has happened in 2011, but we still don't understand why.
As scientists and the equine industry work hard to capitalise on the gains made by the release of a horse vaccine against HENDRA virus, there is still much to be done to ensure that the human and horse tragedies of the past are never repeated. This documentary brings together a range of experiences and insight from the equine community, horse industry and scientific world to explore the future of this virus. The history of HENDRA is well documented and well told. However, the virus's place in the overall catalogue of emerging infectious diseases is often not understood. HENDRA is not the first, and it certainly won't be the last, in a long line of zoonotic diseases that prey on both humans and animals.
We know that over the past decades, there have been an increasing incidence of emerging infectious diseases worldwide.
94, we had HENDRA, 99, 98, we had Nipah, and then 2002, 2003, we had SARS, and now 2012, 2013, we had this MERS, called the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus.
I guess historically Australia's been nicely protected by our splendid isolation, if you like. Horses had to come to Australia on boats. Any horse that had very virulent disease on the trip over didn't last the trip over. And it's not until just recently that people have started to think that sick horses may actually be a risk to me.
We know, and many researchers have shown this, that the viruses can infect a variety of different animals. So it is a concern.
And we have every expectation in coming years that we will encounter more important emerging infectious diseases in people that have emerged from wildlife.
The HENDRA virus has taught the horse community some hard lessons. Our horses, and sometimes even our colleagues and friends, have been claimed by this disease, without warning and without mercy. What is it that we've learned from the HENDRA virus? How do we adjust our way of life and approach to being with horses? What is it that makes HENDRA so hard for the horse community to mitigate against?
The horse industry had become a bit lax, and so we hadn't informed ourselves about HENDRA virus, and really we were behind the 8 ball. So there was a very intensive period of time where we had to get up to speed with what everybody else knew about HENDRA virus, and in some cases change what everybody knew. It was a learning process for everybody, including the scientific community.
The hardest thing I believe the horse community has had to face is changing our way of life a bit on how we interact with our horses. Initially it was how we, well, and still is today, how we manage our horses on our home properties.
But of course, it's about much more than just how we interact with horses. A significant part of this issue is the flying fox. The distribution of flying foxes is continuing to evolve as they are found in every mainland state and territory of Australia. Flying foxes provide the greatest risk and the most important challenge for the horse community. For Professor Christopher Broder, one of the original collaborators in the development of the HENDRA virus horse vaccine, understanding the role of the flying fox in the spread of the virus has been a key concern.
Given the understanding that we have about the HENDRA virus, which is that when it jumps from bats in nature, it almost exclusively infects horses. And the people at risk are always the people that have access or unknown exposure to horses that are shedding virus.
Dr. Louise Cosgrove is an equine veterinarian on the outskirts of Brisbane with a clear message for horse owners who are wrestling with this challenge.
I think people need to get it out of their head that, oh look, the bat colony is 2 kilometres away from me, I'm not at risk. I think that's the biggest challenge. You know, the Lowood case was a prime example. There was no evidence of bats. Just because they don't see bats doesn't mean that they're not at risk.
All you need to get a HENDRA virus infection is an infected bat and a horse. And flying foxes just feed across a huge area of Australia.
You know, I mean, we have a lot of bats in this area, and every night, you know, I would have worries, you know, whether that particular bat that you could hear in the trees, you know, might be infected or not. And we've tried everything. We know what precautions you're supposed to take, but at the end of the day, you know, it could happen at any time, you know, to any horse.
I have no doubt the industry would love to see some sort of management of the flying fox population. It'd have to reduce the risk to our horse owners. I think that'd be seen very positively.
While control or management seems like the best solution for those of us living near a flying fox colony, the scientific community is calling for a reserved and measured approach to dealing with these animals.
I understand the reasoning behind it, and I think if I was living underneath a bat colony, I'd be happy to move them on as well. But I think we need to think it through a little bit more. We don't know what causes the bats to release the virus. We don't want to precipitate that.
The ecosystem has evolved so that they reach a balance in terms of insect control and the pollination, seeds dispersion. So if you remove the bats from the ecosystem, for example, what I can see an immediate effect is that a disease carried by mosquitoes, insects, for example, will just, skyrocket.
If you're worried about a disease that's carried by bats, the best thing you can do is make sure that the population of concern, and in this case horses, is highly vaccinated.
The idea that if you use a vaccine to prevent the initial infection of horses, you'll prevent horse disease, that's one thing. But then in addition to that, you'll actually prevent the possibility of virus shedding from horses and infecting people in the future. So you're getting 2 for 1 in a sense.
So this has been a long dream of both scientists and the policymakers to have a vaccine against HENDRA.
My hope is that we get widespread adoption because this is a deadly virus and we want to protect the Australian horse-owning community. We want to protect families and kids.
Really, vaccine is by far and away the most effective way of protecting a horse against the disease.
And so from a scientific point of view, I think that the more horses that are vaccinated, the less risk there is to people. It's certainly the best tool we've got in our arsenal at the moment.
As scientists are still working on the answers to some of our biggest questions about HENDRA, vaccination against the disease remains the most effective way to minimise the risk to horses and humans. But just how far should we push to reduce our risk of infection through vaccination? Discussion about mandatory vaccination has been heating up around the country. The idea that horses might require inoculation to enter events, or perhaps to even receive veterinary care, is an idea that has caused some controversy. Chairman of Equestrian Australia and equine veterinarian Dr. Warwick Vale is crystal clear about the role that mandatory vaccination should play at horse events.
I support mandatory vaccination at high-risk events, and I think that the community will come to realise that the single best tool for risk mitigation with this disease is vaccination.
Racing Queensland recognises the protection that vaccine affords horses and the industry, and as a result of that, it will be something that does become mandatory across the industry. But in the meantime, we're encouraging all trainers to seriously consider taking up vaccination for their horses.
Heaven forbid we would hate to have another case of HENDRA virus in a racehorse.
The uptake in our sport has been quite encouraging in the sports that we've seen, especially in Queensland and New South Wales. But it's not at the level that I would like to see in terms of risk mitigation.
From the public point of view, one of the issues is that they thought the vaccine was made sort of quickly and in short order. But in fact, that really wasn't the case. I mean, we've been studying the vaccine protein for nearly 13 years.
The biggest challenge would be the implementation. It'd be a massive job for your volunteer organisation to run an event with mandatory vaccination.
Any organisation that is thinking about whether or not vaccination should be mandatory for their events just needs to think about what are the consequences of having a HENDRA case in the middle of one of our events.
I would like to live in an era where I don't have to worry about horses getting HENDRA disease. I live in fear at the moment that that will occur at a horse event where members of the public potentially exposed.
One day all horses will be, just as a matter of course, when they're young, just undergo a normal vaccination protocol against other diseases, including HENDRA. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
While the horse industry, veterinarians and horse owners appreciate the need to vaccinate, there is a perception that the cost of vaccination is a significant barrier. Opinion on this subject is mixed.
It's too expensive. That's the number one reason in this area.
Given the risk that it is to human life, I'd love to see some government funding towards vaccination. Maybe even if it was just in targeted areas where we've had previous HENDRA cases. I think that could be very beneficial.
The cost of the vaccine has definitely been a barrier for some, but I don't think it's a real barrier. I think that in time people will realise the value of the vaccine.
Having a horse involves expense. You know, there's the bumper sticker that says poverty is owning a horse. And I think HENDRA virus vaccine should just become part and parcel of the day-to-day expense of having a horse.
What one's got to realise is that we're talking about the public health safety when you're talking about events. The public are involved. I think they're entitled to get to a show in an environment where we've taken every measure to ensure their safety.
While people in the industry are dealing with horses on a daily basis, vets actually deal with sick horses on a daily basis.
It's beholden on the industry, I think, to make workplaces safe. If you've got that many people working with horses, you know, those people need to be protected.
I don't think you need to think about it very far to see that mandatory vaccination under those circumstances is one of the smartest risk management policies with respect to HENDRA that an organising committee could undertake.
I wouldn't want to be a veterinarian at that event where I'd have to deal with a sick horse that had stayed overnight and then became symptomatic. I wouldn't have to deal with the stress of that disease affecting other horses in the stable complex. I wouldn't want to live with the legal and the other health and occupational health and safety issues that are raised by the spread of this disease.
This is an endemic disease. It's not going away. The bats aren't going away. The bats have had the virus with them for who knows how long. The best way to protect ourselves and the best way to protect our horses is to have the horses vaccinated.
Although not everyone agrees entirely on the idea of mandatory vaccination, one thing certainly is clear. The size of the equine industry in Australia means HENDRA is still a formidable force, with potential to make its mark in a very sinister way.
The equine industry in Australia is enormously diverse and enormous.
In Queensland, I think the figure is something like 30,000 people rely on the racing industry for their bread and butter.
It's followed by eventing and the leisure industry, which is also massive.
Where you run an event with horses, you have the potential to amplify the impact of a disease.
A big outbreak of HENDRA is really going to be an isolated incident, if you like, affecting large numbers of horses. So at a show, at an event, at a race meeting.
One horse comes along to an event. Some of equestrian events have 700 to 1,000 horses at them over the course of a small number of days over a weekend. And so if a sick horse comes along to that event, then we find that that is the ideal opportunity to have a high impact amplification.
Because there is such clear danger to those of us who travel to and participate in horse events, it's important to understand how a serious outbreak might unfold, who would be affected, and the damage radius in human and equine terms.
Say we had a big show with 700 horses. We have a steward's horse that's being kept out, perfectly healthy horse. So after 3 days the horse becomes sick and then we start to become concerned because for the past 3 days he could have been shedding the virus.
When we see that case, a veterinarian is going to, if they're on the grounds, will try and make a diagnosis, and to confirm it is going to take time.
Everybody who's possibly handled that horse, they may have been exposed to HENDRA virus. Every horse that has come into contact.
I would suspect there'll be at least a 24-hour, maybe even longer, 48-hour shutdown until a diagnosis is confirmed.
We then have a quarantine period when a horse is identified with the virus.
Then the government, biosecurity and quarantine people are going to step in and they're going to assess the risk of spread of the disease until they can rule out which ones are exposed and which ones haven't been.
We've had instances of quarantine periods lasting around a month.
So we're talking a huge expense, not only for government but for people as well.
The impact of HENDRA is not going to be dispersed a little bit like the equine influenza impact was. Everyone's sharing the pain and the government coming along and providing some assistance payments and stuff to keep things afloat. The impact of HENDRA will be focused and it will be intense and it will be devastating.
Worst case scenario, some horses and people are actually dying. So it's an enormous impact. It's terrifying to think of.
Now, heaven forbid we haven't had an outbreak at an event yet, but I think it's a matter of time and luck rather than a good management per se.
It's very difficult early on clinically to be sure that you're dealing with a HENDRA horse.
So vets have had to take an awful lot of widespread precaution even when horses are not contracting HENDRA virus.
But if we have an event where only vaccinated horses attend, it's almost impossible for us to get an outbreak of HENDRA virus at that event.
And while time and luck have fortunately meant that there have been no outbreaks at horse events to date, there are others who haven't been as lucky. Natalie Bohm is a member of an unenviable group of HENDRA survivors. It is also a very small group with only 3 of the 7 human victims of the virus still alive today. Natalie's mind and body faced the terror of the HENDRA virus and survived. Today, she is meeting Dr. Deborah Middleton for the first time. Dr. Middleton is a veterinary pathologist at the Australian Animal Health Laboratory, or ARL. Natalie has come to the high-security CSIRO ARL building to swap stories and get to know the scientist who, in her opinion, is a hero to the equine community. Natalie and Deborah both have unique experiences with HENDRA and are equally as interested in hearing about each other's experiences with the virus.
Natalie's been through a life-transforming event, and that I suspect, will always be with her. And I think it sort of affirms to me, I guess, the value of the work that we're doing, that it is important. HENDRA is a uniquely Australian problem. It's not going to go away.
It's hard to communicate with people when they don't have any idea what the virus can actually do.
We deal with a lot of infectious diseases, but it is the most overwhelming infection. I mean, it can turn a perfectly healthy 500 kilogram thoroughbred into a mortally ill creature in 48 hours.
Yeah, being so sick with something, you realise how important your body is. And I guess I learnt quicker than other people. The fatigue's unbelievable. The pain when I ride, it's not just a physical, it's a mental, and your body just you want to do it, but you can't.
So you've not been able to go back to your career?
I just do a couple of days a week just to get me out, because I guess like I could have just rolled over and felt sorry for myself, but I never was that sort of person.
I, saw people who were my colleagues infected with this HENDRA virus. The outbreak at Redlands, I think, was a turning point, for me personally. And then the following year, another colleague succumbed to the same infection, and I'm thinking, we can do something about this. This is actually a place where science can help.
A lot of people hear about it and what it can do and stuff, but I guess I faced it, I've seen it.
Yeah.
I just...
Well, you've got a unique relationship.
Yeah, that's probably...
It's a unique relationship.
Further north, in Natalie's home state of Queensland, Annie Fishburn from Blazing Saddles in Cairns still remembers when HENDRA paid a visit to their property in June of 2012. Biosecurity regulations in Queensland state that properties where a HENDRA outbreak has taken place must be quarantined immediately. This quarantine can last anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. For businesses like Blazing Saddles, a quarantine shutdown can have a fierce impact. Unlike residential properties, businesses could have dozens, if not hundreds, of potentially infected horses and people to factor in.
I wouldn't even hesitate now. As soon as we knew that the vaccine was available, it was just something that we knew had to be done. This horse in particular, she was out around the back dam grazing, and one of the tours had seen that she wasn't looking right at all, so they walked her home. And I suppose their first reaction was that she might have had a bit of colic or something caught in her throat. Describing the symptoms, our vet thought it might have been HENDRA from the start. Whilst he was pretty sure it was, he obviously couldn't confirm it until he sent it off to biosecurity, which took 24 hours. Once we got the notification that she actually had died of HENDRA, biosecurity obviously closed the premises, and we had to put notification up. We had to inform the general public, which is always, a worrying thing to do, because you just don't know how the public will react. We had no horses, no horse riding, no income in that side until we actually had the complete all clear. That did actually hit us pretty heavily for that whole year. This was in June of last year, so there was no vaccination. It wasn't until August, when our vet had told us that there was actually a vaccination that had come on the market, that we actually felt quite relieved that our business was intact. The vaccination has not only given us peace of mind and security, it's given all the tourists and the local community that peace of mind as well.
These stories, although just a sample of many, provide an important platform for discussion about the future direction of HENDRA research, biosecurity and vaccine development. Australia and the world's leading minds in the relevant fields are already looking to what's next when it comes to HENDRA. As one of the planet's most noteworthy zoonotic diseases, work to combat the HENDRA virus is being viewed in an increasingly international context.
The important trends in infectious diseases in horses around the world is going more from diagnosis and treatment to preventative medicine. Okay, so there's more of a push on vaccine development and vaccine technology. So you've got safe, efficacious vaccines against a range of infectious agents.
Although the ultimate aim is protecting human health, but we have to put human health, animal health together. So the terminology now is One Health. So what you want is hopefully in your scientific sort of portfolio, you have people who understand bats and bat ecology and how they host and transmit virus. And you have people who understand the horse, for example, how they behave and vaccination in horses. And you also have people working right in the hospital and to detect the earliest possible of unusual disease events.
I think the HENDRA virus vaccine is a really good example of where the equine infectious diseases research is going. So the researchers at the Australian Animal Health Laboratory and in Queensland are looking at the epidemiology of the virus out in the field. So with HENDRA, it's epidemiology in bats and how the virus goes from bats to horses.
So this is the number one question. Why are they so lethal when they jump from animal to human? And the second question what we try to understand is that how can this virus peacefully coexist with the bat?
We may be able to really make some inroads into understanding how bats can be infected by these viruses, yet not get sick. And if we understand those factors, perhaps they'll lead to new ideas for new therapeutics that go beyond vaccines.
The HENDRA virus story really brings home the importance of fundamental research in answering these questions. We wouldn't have a HENDRA virus vaccine if it wasn't for the fundamental research that was able to be carried out at the Australian Animal Health Laboratory and also with their collaborators in North America.
We need to get a better understanding of the time period over which it's going to be of value to use the antibody treatment in any post-exposure situations in people. I think that the second area of research, we make the observation that the bat populations are changing in Australia. They're moving around the country. In particular, the black flying fox is starting to head further south.
This disease is changing. It seems to be heading further south, so the policy needs to reflect some possibility of change down the track.
But what we really do know categorically is that the vaccine is very, very effective. And so in the absence of knowledge in other areas, you go to the area that you have good knowledge in, right? And so I think it really makes the vaccine much more important. If we had information around some of the other areas, maybe there's other things we can do, but we don't have that information. We really need to use the vaccine. It needs to be in all horses.
The really big ticket item we need to get out there is the 12-month duration of protection data. If we're able to confirm that protection persists for at least 12 months after vaccination, that will be a lot of assistance to the industry.
The next chapter for HENDRA disease in our sport, I believe, is a bedding down of acceptance of vaccination.
It's critically important that given the nature of the disease, it becomes a work health and safety issue with respect to employees in the industry, that they are adequately protected. It's also in the interest of veterinarians when they're called out to make sure that they too are protected. In addition, you've also got protection of the horse owners themselves and their family. So it's important we get as widespread adoption as possible.
From the global view, if you like, researchers are looking at which are the virus determinants that are critical for infection, and then looking at dissecting that down and using those as the basis for new vaccines.
So now what I'm trying to do is very sort of ambitious, and we are trying to establish International Collaborative Center for One Health. What I can see this is in a whole picture is that from human all the way to animal reservoir, and how best we can have rapid diagnosis, rapid prevention, and if prevention fails, then at least we have some way to control the disease outbreak.
So, according to the experts, the future of HENDRA lies in ongoing work with the horse vaccine, a better understanding of why flying foxes are so dangerous when it comes to the virus, and greater acceptance of new biosecurity and prevention measures. In addition to this, as a number of factors in relation to the HENDRA virus are yet to be fully understood, the need for increased uptake of the horse vaccine is greater than ever. Bringing this all together means continued collaboration amongst the equine industry and horse-owning community. Our joint responsibility is to ensure this work has an impact and makes a difference to the health of our horses and ourselves. While the first 20 years of the HENDRA story may be full of grief and sadness and the irreplaceable loss of human and horse lives, the next 20 years looks far brighter. For the first time in a long time, our industry is on the front foot. The scientific community is successfully pushing into new areas of knowledge, and veterinarians and horse owners are well armed with the tools they need to prevent HENDRA virus. And, most importantly, our horses, our friends, our colleagues, and our families are safer than ever.